Welcome to Forbidden Desires channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. The spotlight burned hot on my face, a blinding contrast to the cold pit in my stomach. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had rehearsed this moment 4,000 times, standing before a panel of sharp-eyed judges waiting for their signal. Now or never. I drew a breath and began. I am silver and exact. I have no preconceptions whatever I see. I swallow immediately, just as it is unmisted by love or dislike. The words spilled from my lips. Study, clear syllable carved from weeks of practice, months of hope. I willed my voice to be strong to carry the weight of my passion. My desperation. This was more than just an audition. It was my future. The theatre college only accepted 30 students a year, 300 auditioned. Their dreams crammed into shaky monologues and trembling hands, and 2 was just another hopeful, another girl standing on the edge of her fate. My father sat in the back of the dimly lit hall watching, always watching. I couldn't see his expression through the glare, but I knew he was there. His presence anchored me, a quiet force urging me forward. He had heard this poem a dozen times, helped me shape each line, each pause. When I had doubted myself, he had believed enough for both of us. I am not cruel, only truthful. When my mother died, I was too young to understand, just 5 years old, clinging to the vague memories of her hands, the scent of her perfume, the stories she used to tell before bedtime. Cancer had taken her swiftly, leaving only my father and me, 2 lost souls in a house that had once been full. He never let me feel the weight of our loss alone. He stepped into every gap she left behind, filling the silence with laughter, with love. With unwavering support, he became my entire world. When I had whispered my dream of theatre to him, he hadn't hesitated. He bought me books on acting, took me to plays, even learned the monologue with me line for line so I wouldn't feel alone. The night before the audition, he had recited it with me in our cramped living room, his voice stumbling over words too delicate for his gruff tone. Sophia. I know I sound ridiculous. He had chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. No, Dad Archie, you're amazing. I had teased, biting back laughter. Maybe you should audition too. His eyes had softened then, his voice quieting. This is your dream, kid, but I'll do whatever it takes to get you there. Now standing on this stage, I clung to those words. I finished the monologue with a final breath, letting the silence settle before stepping back. The judges scribbled notes. Unreadable, indifferent. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. Heart still racing. It was over. I stepped down, searching for my father's face as I walked off stage. The moment our eyes met, his lips curved into a small, knowing smile. No matter the outcome, I had done it. I had fought for this and he had fought with me. That had to be enough. The days that followed my audition were some of the longest of my life. Each morning I woke with the same cycle of thoughts. Had I been good enough? Did they remember me? Was I just another face lost in the sea of hopefuls? Dad Archie tried to keep me distracted. He dragged me to the movies, challenged me to late-night card games at the kitchen table, and even attempted to make his famous victory pancakes in advance, as if willing the universe to deliver good news. I laughed, but it didn't stop the gnawing anxiety. Then one afternoon it arrived, a thick, cream-colored envelope. The college's name stamped boldly across the front. My hand shook as I picked it up from the mailbox. My heart lodged somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Dad Archie was in the garage, half buried under the hood of his old truck, whistling to himself. He didn't hear me approach until I cleared my throat. Dad Archie, he looked up, his face smeared with grease. Then his eyes dropped to the envelope in my hands, his entire body stilled. You gonna open it? He asked, his voice carefully, even my fingers curled around the paper. What if it's a no? He wiped his hands on a rag, stepping closer. Then we try again next year, I exhaled, sharply nodding. He gestured toward the house. Come on, let's do this inside. I don't want your big moment getting ruined by me dropping oil on it. Inside we sat at the kitchen table, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I slid my thumb under the flap and carefully tore it open, unfolding the crisp letter. Dear Miss Carter. I skimmed the words, searching. Then I saw it. We are pleased to inform you. My breath caught, my head snapped up, I got in. I whispered. Dad Arch's eyes widened. You. I got in. My voice broke on the last word and suddenly I was laughing, crying, everything all at once. I got in. The next thing I knew, Dad Archie had pulled me into a crushing hug, his arms wrapped tightly around me, his laughter rumbled against my ear. You did it, kid. I knew. I squeezed him back, burying my face against his shoulder. I couldn't have done it without you. He pulled back, resting his hands on my shoulders. His eyes were suspiciously glassy. Sophia, you worked your ass off for this. This was all you maybe. But I knew the truth. He had been there for every step. Every stumble, every doubt, and now for the first time I could see it in his face, pure unfiltered pride, kind that made all the struggle worth it. The letter didn't just confirm my acceptance. It came with instructions in order to better introduce yourself to your future instructors and peers. We ask that you submit a series of personal photographs inspired by a theme of your choosing. It was an odd request, but one that made sense in a theater college. It wasn't just about performance. It was about presence, identity, the ability to transform and tell a story through an image. I read it aloud to Dad Archie, still grinning as I held the paper in my hands. We need to come up with something interesting, I said, looking up at him. Something that reflects me, maybe horror or something from the world of princesses. Dad Archie rubbed his jaw, considering horror. Hey, his eyes twinkle mischievously. I don't know, kid, you scream loud enough in real life. Maybe they'd think it's too natural for you. I threw a wadded-up napkin at him, laughing. Hey, I could pull it off. He leaned back in his chair. Or you could go with the princess thing. You always loved that when you were little. I wore that Cinderella a dress to the grocery store for 2 months straight. I rolled my eyes. Okay, but I don't want to be just some regular princess. It has to be different. Something unique. Dad Archie tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. What about a mix? I raised an eyebrow. A mix? He nodded. A princess from a horror story. The idea sparked something in my mind instantly. A dark fairy tale, a world of beauty and unease. A princess cursed. Yes. I breathed like a princess trapped in a nightmare, something haunting but beautiful. A little gawk. Maybe. Dad Archie grinned. No, that sounds like my girl. I jumped up from the table, already bursting with ideas. Okay. We need a plan, costumes, makeup, and his setting. Oh, Dad Archie. We have to find the perfect place. He chuckled, watching me with amusement. Slow down. Spielberg. We'll figure it out, but I couldn't slow down. My brain was already running wild. The next day we scouted for a location. I didn't want anything ordinary. I wanted something that looked like it belonged in a forgotten fairy tale. We drove outside of town, passing empty fields and patches of forest until we found it. An abandoned house stood at the edge of a wooded area, its old brick walls cracked and covered in ivy, a long-forgotten relic. The moment I saw it, I knew. This is it. I whispered. Dad Archie parked the truck and turned off the engine. He looked up at the house, nodding approvingly. Creepy as hell. Yeah. I see the vision, I smirked. Told you. We stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the door. The house was quiet except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of wood shifting in the breeze. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows across the floor. Dad Archie placed his hands on his SS. All right. What's the plan? Director? I grinned. We make magic back home. We pulled together everything we needed. I found an old gown in a thrift store, pale blue, delicate lace at the sleeves, torn in just the right places to look ghostly. We dusted it with flour to make it look aged and worn. Makeup was next, dark, smudged under my eyes, a pale complexion, lips just a little too red, like someone who had been trapped in a dream for 300 years. I added scratches along my arms, smudged of dirt along my hands. Dad Archie stood behind me as I studied myself in the mirror. Creepy princess vibes, you nailed it. I smiled. You sure you don't want some makeup too? You could be the haunted king. He held up his hands in surrender. Nope, I'm just the cameraman. We arrived at the house just before sunset. The light was golden, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked pavement. I stepped into position, my dress trailing along the ground. Dad Archie lifted the camera. All right. Sophia, show me the story. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Then I let myself sink into character. I became the princess locked away for centuries, her beauty untouched but her soul worn thin. I stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the crumbling frame, eyes distant. I wandered barefoot through the abandoned hall, fingers grazing the dust-covered walls as if searching for something lost. I stood beneath a shattered window, bathed in dying light, staring at the outside world as if I had never seen it before. Dad Archie moved around me, snapping pictures from different angles. Hold that look, that's it now. Step forward like you're walking towards something you fear. I obeyed. Camera clicked, then again, then a sound, a floorboard creaked not under me. Behind me I spun around, heart hammering. The house was silent, empty. Dad Archie frowned, lowering the camera. Did you hear that? I nodded slowly. Yeah, the air was suddenly heavier. The house no longer just a backdrop but something alive watching. Dad Archie cleared his throat. All right. Let's wrap this up. I swallowed, nodding. I did one last pose, standing in the center of the room, the golden light casting long shadows around me. Cursed princess in her kingdom of decay. Camera clicked one final time and then we left. That night, Dad Archie and I scrolled through the photos on my laptop. Each one looked like a painting, haunting, dreamlike, a story captured in frozen moments. I felt a thrill of satisfaction. They're perfect. Dad Archie leaned back in his chair, stretching. You did good, kid. I glanced at him. We did good. His eyes softened. Damn right. I sent the pictures to the college, my fingers trembling slightly. As I hit send, it was done. I had stepped into my story, made it real, brought it to life. Now all I had to do was wait. The second I hit send, I let out a deep breath and shut my laptop. It was done. The photos were on their way to the college, and now all I could do was wait for their response. My hands were still trembling with excitement. When I turned to look at Dad Archie, he was already watching me, his expressions soft with something unspoken. Then, without warning, he grinned and pulled me into a hug, lifting me slightly off the ground. I let out a small squeal of laughter as he spun me once before setting me back down. You did it, kid. He said, his voice thick with emotion. You actually did it. I buried my face against his shoulder for a moment, allowing myself to just feel the warmth of it, the security, the pride in his arms. No one else in the world had believed in me the way he had. No one else had been there for every step, every doubt, every late-night breakdown. When he pulled back, his hands stayed on my shoulders. We need to celebrate. I wiped at my eyes, still breathless from the hug. We already made pancakes. This morning he rolled his eyes. Sophia, that was preemptive celebration. Now we do the real thing, get in the car. I laughed as he grabbed his keys and gestured dramatically toward the front door. Without a second thought, I grabbed my hoodie and followed him out the night. Air was cool as we climbed into his truck. The sky above was that deep, endless navy, the kind of color that made you believe anything was possible. Dad Archie cranked the engine, rolled down the windows, and turned up the music before we even pulled out of the driveway. The first song that blasted through the speakers was an old rock anthem he loved, one that had been playing in our house for as long as I could remember. I shot him a look. Really, he just grinned and reached for the volume knob, turning it up even louder. We drove with no particular destination, the city lights flickering in and out of view. As we passed through familiar streets, the music filled every space, drowning out everything else. and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself relax completely. At a red light, Dad Archie drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, nodding along to the song, you know. I always knew you'd make it. I glanced at him. You say that now, but remember when I almost threw up before my audition, he smacked. Yeah, and I told you to suck it up because the stage doesn't wait for nerves. I laughed. You also recited my monologue with me. Even though you sounded ridiculous, I did that for moral support. He defended, shaking his head, and I don't think I sounded that bad. You kind of did fine, but it worked, didn't it? I nodded, a smile lingering on my lips. Yeah, it did. The light turned green and we kept driving past the quiet residential streets, through the more crowded parts of the city where people walked in groups, laughter spilling onto the sidewalks. Everything felt alive, like the whole world was celebrating with me. One point. We pulled up next to a group of teenagers at another red light. They glanced over at us, clearly amused by the loud music blasting from our truck. Dad Archie, without missing a beat, turned to me and said, "Quick, pretend we're super cool." I burst out laughing just as the light changed and we took off down the street. Eventually, we ended up at an overlook just outside the city. It was a place we had been coming to for years, ever since I was little, from here. The city stretched out below a sea of flickering lights, a place full of stories waiting to be written. We sat on the hood of the truck, the warm metal beneath us, the wind cool against my face, you know. Dad Archie said after a moment, his voice quieter. Now she would been proud. I didn't have to ask who he meant. I swallowed against the sudden lump in my throat. You think so, he nodded. Yeah, your mom, she would have been your biggest fan. I looked down at my hands. I wish she could have seen this. Dad Archie was silent for a beat. Then he reached over and squeezed my hand. She sees it. Sophia, and she sees you. I exhaled slowly, letting his words settle inside me for a while. We just sat there watching the city. The music now just a faint hum from the truck. The excitement of the night was still there, but now it was something softer. Scared, Dad Archie asked. Eventually, a little, I admitted. Good, he said, means it's worth it. I turned to look at him, eyebrows raised. That's some kind of wisdom from an old guy. He chuckled. Nor just something I've learned from watching you fight for this. I smiled, and in that moment, sitting on the hood of that truck with the city stretching out before me, I knew that no matter how terrifying the next step was, I wasn't walking into it alone. I had him, I had everything he had taught me, and I was ready. The summer passed in a blur of warm nights, late drives, and moments I wanted to hold on to forever, but seasons change and so do chapters in life. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of my new college, staring up at the grand building that would define the next few years of my life. The theater department was tucked inside an old brick structure covered in ivy, the kind of place that felt like it had stories of its own. I adjusted the strap of my bag, inhaled deeply, and stepped inside. The halls were already filled with students, some chatting excitedly, others looking just as overwhelmed as I felt. My first class was Foundations of Performance, a course designed to break us in, to strip away our habits and rebuild us as true actors. I found my seat near the middle, smoothing out the notebook on my desk as the professor walked in. He was an older man with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through us. He didn't waste time with introductions. Some of you think you already know how to act, he said, pacing in front of the class. Some of you have spent years in theater clubs, played leads in high school productions, or even taken private lessons. Forget all of that. A murmur spread through the room, but no one dared to speak. Theater is not about pretending. It's about truth, and if you're not ready to break yourself down to find it, then you're in the wrong place. I gripped my pen tighter, my heart hammering. This was real. This was the challenge I had dreamed of. The first assignment came immediately. We had to memorize and perform a monologue by the end of the week, but we weren't allowed to act. Don't perform. The professor warned us. Just say the words. And if I see 1 ounce of fake emotion, you're doing it over. I left the classroom with my head spinning. This was nothing like the performances I had done before. It wasn't just about delivering lines. It was about stripping everything away, standing bare in front of an audience with nothing but honesty. Hard didn't even begin to describe it. The next few days were a whirlwind of assignments, readings, and late nights in my tiny dorm room, reciting lines under my breath until my voice grew hoarse. Every class pushed me further, made me rethink everything I thought I knew about acting. There were moments of doubt, nights when I sat on the floor exhausted, questioning if I was really meant for this. But then I'd remember the sound of my dad Arch's voice telling me that hard things are worth it. And somehow I kept going. One evening after a particularly difficult rehearsal, my phone buzzed. "Dad Archie, how's my star doing?" I smiled, sinking onto my bed before replying me tired. "My professor is terrifying, but I love it." A moment later, his response came through. "Dad Archie, good. If it was easy, it wouldn't be worth it. Proud of you, kid." I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink in. My life was harder. Now it was filled with pressure, deadlines, and a level of work I hadn't imagined. But beneath all of it, there was happiness. I was exactly where I was meant to be, and Dad Archie was happy too, and my story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next videos.